Administrators of the internal provinces now found themselves in a fairly bad neighborhood with fairly bad neighbors, the Americans. The Americans tended to want to look over the fence at what their neighbors' holdings were. And it became such an issue. The cane tucks, the Spanish called them, kept flowing down the Mississippi into Louisiana, that the Spanish built a squadron of warships just to patrol the Mississippi, kind of a border patrol. Even so, it was a very porous border, and Americans continued to slip over to the West Bank. The Spanish even tried bribing an American official, James Wilkinson, the American commander of the garrisons in the lower Mississippi. But even with James Wilkinson being a double agent working both the Americans against the Spanish and the Spanish against the Americans, the average Americans tended to have happy feet, and they tended to keep crossing the Mississippi. One of these guys that came into Texas on a regular basis was Philip Nolan. Philip Nolan was a Mustanger, and his specialty was to go and round up wild horses and then drive them back for American buyers east of the Mississippi. But Philip Nolan was also probably taking very careful notes of everything he saw and did, so that way he knew where there might be some vulnerabilities. Eventually, the Spanish hunt him down and kill him and imprison the survivors of his about 30-man party. The Spanish are getting very, very nervous. Well, as if this wasn't problem enough, events in Europe go south in a hurry. 1789, we have the eruption of the French Revolution, a big turning point in European history. Well, this will have implications for Spain, because a decade later, in 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the ruler of all France. And in that position, he starts to put some pressure on his neighbors. The Spanish technically are allies with the French, but they are very junior partners under this new reality. And in the process of this relationship, they give back Louisiana to the French in the Treaty of San Ildefonso, 1801. Well, the Spanish shouldn't have done it, because the first thing the French do, once they figure out that Louisiana is not going to do them much good, is they try to turn it into cash. And they find a very willing buyer in the United States. So the Spanish are deprived not only of Louisiana, but of the proceeds of the sale. So now the Americans are their neighbors all the way into Texas. And here's why. No one quite understood what all Louisiana included. You know, where are the corners on this ranch that the Americans just bought? Under the French definition, Louisiana included all lands that were drained into the Mississippi. So the furthest creek that flowed into the furthest river that flowed into the Mississippi, all those watersheds were part of Louisiana. President Thomas Jefferson of the United States declared that Louisiana included any place along the Gulf where a Frenchman had stood on dry ground, which would include parts of Texas. So under both definitions, parts of Texas are now included in the Louisiana Purchase. But the Spanish were not buying it. Louisiana Purchase, they weren't buying it. Here's what they decided to do. They said, no, we are not going to recognize any of those claims, especially into Texas. Texas was just way too close to the good parts of Mexico further south. They were going to hold the line. They were not going to cede any more territory than necessary. So in essence, the Spanish and the Americans decided not to decide. And the result is a strip of land that essentially runs from the Sabine River in East Texas all the way to the Calcasieu River in Louisiana, and then kind of in a narrow strip the further north you go, that became known as the neutral ground. Well, this deciding not to decide merely pushes back the issue, but what it does create is a lawless zone. In some places 100 miles wide, in some places like up around Caddo Lake, merely 30 miles wide, but even so, it's no man's land, and it becomes a magnet to lawless elements looking to make their way into Texas.